It was a remote national park, far from civilization's touch. John had worked as a forest ranger for years and had seen all kinds of strange things: wild animals, survivalists, and eerie silences in the middle of the day. But nothing prepared him for this night. One evening, on his usual night patrol, the forest was alive with the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. A dense fog clung to the ground, thick and heavy. John's flashlight cut through the mist as he walked, feeling alone, or so he thought. Halfway through his route, his radio let out a harsh burst of static. He froze as a voice whispered through, soft, yet chilling. "John! John!" It called. John's blood ran cold. He pressed the button to respond, but there was only static. No one else was on duty, and no one should have known his location. He shook it off, dismissing it as a glitch. But as he continued, the air around him grew heavier, almost suffocating. Trees loomed like twisted shadows, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Then he saw it. At the edge of the path, a figure stood still in the fog, dressed in an old ranger uniform, the fabric faded and torn. But its face was nothing but a hollow void, a dark emptiness that swallowed the light from his flashlight. The figure raised a hand, beckoning him forward. John froze, his heart pounding in his chest. It felt like he'd stepped into a nightmare. He took a step back, then another. His flashlight flickered, and in that split second, the figure vanished into the fog. Yet, he felt it lurking just out of sight, watching. He turned and ran, tearing through the forest. Branches clawed at him, the ground uneven and treacherous. When he finally reached the ranger station, he locked himself inside, gasping for breath. He called for backup, but when they arrived, there was no sign of anyone, only the silence of the night. John transferred out of the park soon after, but he never forgot that night. The figure's hollow face haunted his sleep, waking him in a cold sweat. It grew sharper in his memory each time: the tattered uniform, the darkness in its face, and that hand, reaching, almost pleading. In the months that followed, John tried to bury the memory. He took on extra shifts during the day, avoiding night patrols. But every so often, he'd catch a glimpse out of the corner of his eye, a shadow at the tree line, a figure on a distant hill, always vanishing when he looked directly at it. One day, he shared his story with an older ranger, Thomas. As John spoke, Thomas went pale. Thomas leaned in, his voice low. "Years back, we lost a ranger out there," he said. "Name was Dan, disappeared on a foggy night. They found his truck at the park's edge, engine still running, headlights pointed down an empty trail, but they never found him." Thomas glanced around, almost fearful. "They say he never left. Locals call him the Lost Ranger. He wanders the park, trying to find his way back. But there's nothing left of him now, just a hollow shell, forever lost in the woods." John felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't the only one who'd seen it. One evening, a group of hikers went off trail and didn't return. As the sun set, John knew he'd have to go out there. The fog was thicker than usual, wrapping around him like a shroud, muffling every sound. The trees seemed to close in, forming a path that felt more like a tunnel. As he followed their tracks, John constantly glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the faceless figure watching from the shadows. Hours later, he found the hikers. They were pale and shivering, barely able to speak. As John tried to comfort them, one of them grabbed his arm, eyes wide with terror. "There was someone in the fog," she whispered. "He just stood there, watching us. But he had no face." John's blood ran cold. He quickly led them back, but their words haunted him. The next night, as he sat alone in his cabin, he heard a soft, shuffling sound, followed by a faint tap on the glass. Slowly, John turned toward the window. A hand was pressed against the glass, slowly sliding down, leaving a trail of condensation. Behind it, the shadowy outline of the faceless figure stared back at him, and then it disappeared into the fog once more. John didn't sleep that night, and he hasn't since.